The bullet tore through Isaac Murdock's left shoulder just as the January blizzard hit the Montana territory with the fury of a freight train, spinning him off his horse and into the snow-covered rocks, where he lay bleeding and cursing his stupidity for taking the mountain pass alone. He had been tracking the gang that murdered his business partner for 3 weeks, getting closer each day, and his impatience had made him reckless. Now the outlaws were gone, disappeared into the white wall of snow ahead, and Isaac pressed his right hand against the wound, feeling the hot blood seep between his fingers while the cold tried to claim the rest of him. His horse had bolted at the sound of gunfire, taking his bedroll and most of his supplies with it, leaving him with only the rifle he had dropped somewhere in the snow and the pistol still holstered at his hip. The wind screamed through the pines, carrying ice crystals that stung his face like 1,000 tiny knives, and Isaac knew with absolute certainty that he would die here if he did not find shelter soon. He forced himself to stand, swaying as darkness crept into the edges of his vision, and stumbled forward through the deepening drifts. Every step sent lightning bolts of agony through his shoulder, but he kept moving because stopping meant freezing to death within the hour. The temperature had dropped so fast that his breath came out in clouds that froze instantly on his beard, coating the dark hair with white frost. At 26 years old, Isaac had survived range wars, stampedes, and 2 separate gunfights in Bozeman saloons, but this felt different. This felt like the end of things. He did not know how long he walked before he saw the darker shadow against the mountainside that might have been a cave. His legs gave out twice before he reached it, and he crawled the last 20 feet on his hands and knees, leaving a trail of blood droplets that the snow quickly covered. The cave entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through, but it opened into a larger space beyond. Isaac collapsed just inside, gasping for breath, his whole body shaking with cold and shock. That was where Olivia Brennan found him an hour later, when she returned to the cave she had claimed as temporary shelter from the storm. Olivia had been traveling from Fort Benton to Bozeman with a wagon train when the weather turned murderous 3 days ago. The group had made camp in a valley, but she had gone exploring the rock formations nearby, searching for geological samples for her research. She was a geologist, one of the few women in the field, and she had been documenting the mineral deposits of Montana territory for a mining company back east. When the blizzard hit with terrifying speed, she had been cut off from the camp, forced to find shelter or die. She had stumbled into this cave system with nothing but her collection bag, her winter coat, and the small emergency kit she always carried when working in the field. Now she stood at the cave entrance, staring at the large man sprawled across the stone floor, and her heart hammered against her ribs. Blood stained the rock beneath him, dark and gleaming in the dim light. For a moment, she considered backing away, finding another shelter, because a wounded stranger could be as dangerous as the storm. But even as the thought crossed her mind, she was moving forward, kneeling beside him to check for signs of life. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. His face, partially hidden by frost-covered beard, was pale beneath the tan. She could see the bullet wound in his shoulder now, the hole in his coat dark with blood. Without immediate help, he would bleed to death or succumb to fever. Olivia had treated wounds before, growing up on a ranch in Wyoming territory where doctors were scarce, and everyone learned basic medicine out of necessity. She knew what needed to be done. First, she needed fire. She had gathered dead wood yesterday before the storm worsened, stacking it deeper in the cave where it stayed dry. Now she worked quickly, arranging kindling and striking sparks from the flint and steel in her emergency kit. Her fingers, stiff with cold, fumbled at first, but eventually a small flame caught and grew. She fed it carefully, building it up until orange light danced across the cave walls and blessed warmth began to spread. The man stirred as the temperature rose, groaning through cracked lips. His eyes opened, unfocused and fever-bright, the color of winter sky before snow. They fixed on her face without comprehension. "Easy," Olivia said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "You have been shot. I need to examine the wound." He tried to speak but only managed a rasping sound. She retrieved her canteen, which she had kept inside her coat to prevent freezing, and held it to his lips. He drank greedily, water spilling down his chin. "Slow," she cautioned. "Not too much at once." When he had drunk enough, she pulled the canteen away and began the difficult task of removing his coat. He cried out when she moved his injured shoulder, a sound of pure agony that made her stomach clench, but she forced herself to continue. The coat was frozen to his shirt with ice and blood. She had to cut through the fabric with her pocket knife, exposing the wound to the firelight. The entry wound was a ragged hole just below his collarbone, still seeping blood. She rolled him carefully onto his side, ignoring his groans, and checked his back. No exit wound. The bullet was still inside him. "I am sorry," she said quietly, though she did not know if he could hear her. "This is going to hurt." She had her emergency medical supplies, which included carbolic acid for sterilization, needles, catgut thread, and strips of clean linen for bandages. What she did not have were proper surgical tools. She would have to use her pocket knife and hope it was enough. She held the blade in the flames until it glowed, sterilizing it as best she could, then poured carbolic acid over her hands and the wound itself. Isaac screamed when the acid hit raw flesh, his body arching off the cave floor. Olivia pinned him down with one hand on his chest, surprised by the strength still in him. "Hold still," she ordered, putting iron into her voice. "If you thrash around, I might cut something vital." She did not know if he understood, but he went rigid, every muscle locked tight. His eyes found hers in the firelight, wide with pain and something else. Trust, maybe, or simply the recognition that she was his only chance. Olivia took a deep breath and began to probe the wound with her knife. The work was delicate and gruesome. She could feel the bullet lodged against bone, buried deep in tissue that tore and bled with every movement of the blade. Her hand remained steady even as her stomach rebelled. She had dissected rocks, mapped strata, examined countless geological samples with scientific precision, and she brought that same focus to this bloody task. The man beneath her hands breathed in sharp gasps, his face gray with shock, but he did not move. Sweat poured down his forehead despite the cold, and she could feel his heart racing under her palm. It took 20 minutes to work the bullet free. When it finally came out, a flattened piece of lead that clinked against the stone floor, Olivia felt a surge of relief so intense it made her dizzy. But the work was not finished. She packed the wound with cloth soaked in carbolic acid, stitched the torn flesh back together with careful sutures, and bound his shoulder with strips of linen torn from her spare shirt. By the time she finished, her hands were covered in his blood and shaking from exhaustion. The man had passed out somewhere during the procedure, which was probably a mercy. Olivia covered him with his coat and her own, then added more wood to the fire. The storm howled outside, shaking the cave entrance with its fury. They were trapped here until the weather cleared, possibly for days. She had some food in her collection bag, jerky and hardtack she had brought for her geological expedition, but it would not last long between two people. She settled beside the fire and finally allowed herself to shake. She was 23 years old, had a degree from a women's college back east, and had spent the last 2 years proving herself in a field dominated by men who thought women had no business studying rocks and minerals. She had faced condescension, harassment, and outright hostility with calm determination. But she had never before cut a bullet out of a man's shoulder by firelight in a frozen cave while a blizzard tried to kill them both. The man slept fitfully, moaning sometimes and muttering words she could not decipher. She checked his wound periodically through the night, relieved when the bleeding stayed minimal. Fever was the next danger. If infection set in, there was little she could do beyond keeping him warm and hydrated and hoping his body was strong enough to fight. Dawn brought no relief. The storm continued unabated, the world beyond the cave a whiteout impossible to navigate. Olivia melted snow for water and forced herself to eat some jerky, though she had no appetite. The man woke briefly near midday, his eyes clearer but still glazed with fever. "Where am I?" His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "A cave in the mountains east of Bozeman," Olivia said, kneeling beside him. "You were shot. Do you remember?" He closed his eyes, thinking. "Gang, I was following them. They ambushed me. The bullet is out. I stitched you up as best I could. You need to rest and let your body heal." His eyes opened again, focusing on her face. Even sick with fever, she could see the intelligence in them, the quick assessment of a man used to reading situations fast. "You did that. Took the bullet out." There was no one else. He studied her for a long moment. "What is your name?" "Olivia Brennan." "Isaac Murdock." He tried to shift position and gasped in pain. "Thank you for saving my life, Miss Brennan. We are not safe yet. The storm is still raging and you have a fever. Rest now. Save your strength." He wanted to argue. She could see it in his face. But exhaustion dragged him back under before he could speak. Olivia returned to the fire, feeding it carefully to conserve their limited wood supply. She had enough fuel for perhaps 3 more days if she was frugal. After that, they would have to venture into the storm to gather more or freeze to death. The second night was harder. Isaac's fever spiked, leaving him delirious and thrashing. Olivia had to hold him down to prevent him from tearing open his stitches. He called out names she did not recognize, pleaded with people who were not there, relived moments from his past in disjointed fragments. She learned he had a sister named Sarah, that he had served briefly in the cavalry before mustering out to start a freight business, that his partner's name had been Thomas Webb, and the gang that killed him was led by a man called Crane. "I will find them," he muttered through cracked lips, his body burning with fever. "I swear it, Thomas. I will make them pay." "Hush," Olivia soothed, wiping his forehead with a damp cloth. "Rest now. There will be time for justice later." She did not sleep that night, keeping vigil beside him while the wind shrieked its fury outside. Twice she thought she had lost him, his breathing growing so shallow she could barely detect it, but each time he rallied. As false dawn lightened the cave entrance, his fever finally broke. He fell into a deep, natural sleep, and Olivia allowed herself to hope. The storm ended on the 3rd day. Olivia woke to silence, so complete after days of howling wind that it seemed unnatural. She crawled to the cave entrance and looked out on a transformed world. Snow lay 6 feet deep in places, sculpted by the wind into fantastic shapes. The sky above was painfully blue, and the sun glinted off the white expanse with blinding intensity. The temperature had dropped even further with the clearing of the clouds, but at least they could see now. At least they could try to find their way back to civilization. Isaac was awake when she returned to the fire, sitting up with his back against the cave wall. Color had returned to his face, though he still looked weak. His beard had grown in the days since he had been shot, dark and thick, making him look wilder somehow. "How do you feel?" Olivia asked. Like I was shot and had a bullet dug out with a pocket knife, he said, but there was a hint of humor in his voice. Better than yesterday, though. The fever broke. Yes, you were very sick. She handed him the canteen. The storm has passed. We should try to reach Bozeman as soon as you are strong enough to travel. He drank deeply, then looked at her with those winter sky eyes. How long have we been here? 3 days. And you have been taking care of me the whole time. There was no alternative. Still, I owe you my life. He shifted position, wincing. Tell me about yourself, Miss Brennan. How does a woman end up alone in a cave during a Montana blizzard? So she told him, explaining about her work as a geologist, the wagon train, getting separated when the storm hit. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he understood more about geology than most men she met. My freight business transported ore from mines, he explained when she remarked on his knowledge. I had to learn about different minerals and their properties to know what I was hauling. It is fascinating stuff. They talked through the morning, carefully at first, then with growing ease. Isaac had grown up in Missouri, come west after the war, tried his hand at various trades before settling on freighting. Olivia had been raised in Wyoming Territory, sent east for college against her father's wishes, and returned determined to prove women could contribute to scientific knowledge. They were both stubborn, both driven by passions others did not understand. My father wanted me to marry some rancher and raise children, Olivia said. He said education was wasted on a woman. We have not spoken in 2 years. That is his loss, Isaac said firmly. Any man should be proud to have a daughter with your skills and courage. The simple statement, spoken with such conviction, touched something deep inside her. She turned away to hide the sudden moisture in her eyes, busying herself with checking his bandages. We should try to find my wagon train, she said. They were camped in a valley about 5 miles west. If they survived the storm, they will be worried about me. Can you walk that far in this snow, can you? He met her eyes and something passed between them, an understanding of mutual stubbornness. I can try. They prepared to leave, gathering what little they had. Olivia fashioned a makeshift sling for Isaac's arm from strips of cloth. He moved carefully, pain evident in every motion, but he did not complain. Before they left the cave, he turned to look back at the fire, now kicked out and covered with snow. I will remember this place, he said quietly. The cave where I should have died but did not. They set out into the frozen wilderness, breaking trail through deep snow. The going was brutally hard. Isaac's strength gave out after the first mile, and Olivia had to support him, feeling him lean more heavily against her with each step. But they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that staying in the cave meant eventual starvation. The sun was directly overhead when they heard voices. Olivia shouted, her voice cracking with relief, and moments later men appeared through the trees. The wagon train had survived, hunkered down in their valley, and had been preparing to search for survivors now that the weather cleared. They found Olivia's tracks from days ago, partially filled with snow, and followed them toward the mountains. The wagon master, a gruff man named Henderson, took in the scene with experienced eyes. You found shelter then, smart, and who is this? Isaac Murdock. He was shot before the storm. I treated his wound. Henderson whistled low. You did good work, Miss Brennan. Let us get you both back to camp and warmed up proper. The camp was a welcome sight, canvas tents clustered around cook fires, the smell of coffee and bacon making Olivia's stomach growl. They had been given up for dead, she learned, and her return was greeted with surprise and relief. The other travelers made room in one of the larger tents, providing blankets and hot food. A minister's wife named Mrs. Patterson clucked over Isaac's wound with approval. Clean stitching, she pronounced. You have a steady hand, Miss Brennan. And you used carbolic acid, very modern. He should heal well if infection does not set in. Isaac slept for 16 hours straight, his body demanding rest to heal. Olivia stayed nearby, checking on him periodically, though she told herself it was simple concern for a patient. Mrs. Patterson noticed her hovering and smiled knowingly, but said nothing. When Isaac finally woke, stronger and clearer-headed, he asked to speak with Olivia privately. They walked a short distance from camp, far enough for privacy but close enough to remain proper. The snow crunched under their boots, and their breath plumed in the frigid air. "We will reach Bozeman in 2 days," Isaac said. "The wagon master wants to leave tomorrow morning. Once we arrive, our paths will likely diverge. You will continue with your geological work, and I need to recover my strength before I can resume tracking Crane's gang." "You still intend to go after them?" Olivia asked, though she already knew the answer. "Thomas was my partner and my friend. They shot him down in cold blood during a robbery. I cannot let that stand. Even if it gets you killed." He looked at her, and she saw determination in his eyes mixed with something softer. "What kind of man would I be if I let his murder go unavenged? But you have made me reconsider my methods. Going alone, rushing ahead without planning, that is what got me shot. I need to be smarter about this." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun glint off the snow-covered peaks. Olivia felt an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with the cold. "I will worry about you," she said finally, surprised by her own honesty. "Will you?" His voice was gentle. "That is something, then, because I expect I will think about you often, Miss Brennan, the woman who saved my life in a frozen cave. The geologist who can cut bullets out of shoulders and talk about sedimentary rock formations with equal skill." "Olivia," she said. "You should call me Olivia. Only if you call me Isaac." They shared a smile, small and tentative but real. Something was growing between them, fragile as new ice but undeniably present. They both felt it, though neither quite knew what to do with it yet. The wagon train rolled into Bozeman 2 days later, as Henderson predicted. The town was busy despite the winter cold, miners and ranchers and freighters all conducting business before the next storm hit. Wooden buildings lined the main street, smoke rising from 100 chimneys. The Bridger Mountains loomed to the north, white and magnificent against the blue sky. Isaac had friends in town, fellow freighters who welcomed him despite his wounded state. They told him his horse had wandered in 3 days after the storm, still carrying most of his gear. It was a small miracle that made him laugh. "Stubborn animal," he said with affection, "just like her owner." Olivia found lodging at a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Thompson. The mining company she worked for had an office in Bozeman, and she needed to file reports and arrange for her samples to be shipped east. She threw herself into work, trying not to think about Isaac, but her mind kept drifting to the cave, the firelight, the feel of his heart beating under her palm as she stitched his wound. A week after their arrival, Isaac came calling at the boarding house. He looked stronger, color restored to his face, though his arm was still in a sling. Mrs. Thompson showed him into the parlor with an approving smile that made Olivia's cheeks warm. "I wanted to thank you properly," Isaac said once they were alone, "for saving my life. Words seem inadequate, but they are all I have." "You have thanked me already," Olivia said, "multiple times. Still, I feel I should do something more. May I take you to dinner? The hotel has a restaurant quite respectable. Mrs. Thompson could serve as chaperone if that would make you more comfortable." Olivia found herself smiling. "I would like that, and no chaperone is necessary. I am a modern woman, after all." They dined that evening at the hotel. a pleasant meal of beef steak and potatoes while the winter wind rattled the windows. They talked easily. Continuing conversations started in the cave and expanded during the wagon journey. Isaac told her more about his freight business, the satisfaction of building something from nothing, the pain of losing Thomas. Olivia described her geological discoveries, the thrill of mapping unknown territory, the frustration of dealing with men who dismissed her work simply because she was a woman. "They say women lack the constitution for field work," she said, anger creeping into her voice. "That our delicate natures cannot handle the rigors of scientific study. Never mind that I hiked through the Rockies for 6 months and survived a blizzard that would have killed most men." "You are tougher than any man I know," Isaac said, "myself included. I passed out while you were digging a bullet out of me. You did not flinch." "I was terrified," she admitted. "I thought I might kill you. My hands were shaking so badly afterward. But you did it anyway. That is true courage, doing what needs doing despite the fear." Their eyes met across the table, and Olivia felt that pull again, stronger now. She was drawn to this man in ways that had nothing to do with the dramatic circumstances of their meeting. He was intelligent, honorable, and he treated her as an equal rather than a fragile ornament. In her experience, such men were rare. They began seeing each other regularly. Isaac was recovering from his wound, unable to travel or do heavy work, so he had time to spare. Olivia was waiting for the next phase of her geological survey to begin in spring. They walked together through the snowy streets of Bozeman, attended church socials and town dances, sat by the fire in Mrs. Thompson's parlor and talked until late in the evening. The town gossips noticed, of course. A single woman and a single man spending so much time together sparked speculation. But the gossip was mostly benign, even approving. They made a striking couple, people said. Both strong-willed and independent, well-matched in temperament. Isaac's friends were less subtle in their approval. A fellow freighter named Jack Carson cornered him at the saloon one evening, grinning widely. "When are you going to propose to that woman?" Jack demanded. "It is obvious you are in love with her." Isaac stared into his whiskey glass, considering, "Is it that obvious?" "To everyone but possibly her, though I suspect she knows. The way she looks at you, Isaac, that is not simple friendship. She has her career, important work. I cannot ask her to give that up." "Has she said she would have to give it up? Maybe she wants both, a career and a partnership." "Or maybe you should ask her what she wants instead of assuming." The words stayed with Isaac, echoing in his mind. He was falling in love with Olivia Brennan, had been since she knelt beside him in that cave and promised to help despite the danger. But love was complicated, especially when both parties had dreams and ambitions that might not align. Winter deepened, bringing more snow and bitter cold. The town huddled against the weather, and indoor entertainments became the norm. One evening, Mrs. Thompson's boarding house hosted a small gathering, and Olivia played piano while others sang. Isaac stood near the instrument, watching her fingers move across the keys with the same precision she had used when stitching his wound. He was transfixed, not just by her skill but by the joy on her face as she played. Later, when the other guests had departed, they sat together in the parlor. Mrs. Thompson had discreetly retired, trusting them to behave appropriately. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light that pushed back the winter darkness. "I have been thinking," Isaac said carefully, "about what comes next, for both of us." Olivia tensed slightly, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "What do you mean? My shoulder is nearly healed." "Soon I will be able to travel again, to resume my pursuit of Crane and his gang. And you will begin your spring survey, heading into the mountains to study your rocks. Our paths will diverge, possibly for months." "Yes," Olivia said quietly. I have been thinking about that too. Isaac took a deep breath, gathering courage. I do not want that to happen, not permanently. These past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life, despite everything. You are brilliant and brave and beautiful, and I find myself thinking about you every moment we are apart. I believe I am in love with you, Olivia. I believe I have been since you told me to hold still while you cut into my shoulder with a knife. Olivia's heart hammered in her chest. She had known her feelings for Isaac ran deep, had felt them growing stronger each day, but hearing him voice his own emotions made it real in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. I love you too, she said, the words emerging in a rush. I have tried not to, told myself it was foolish to form attachments when our lives are so complicated, but I cannot help it. You are unlike any man I have ever known. Isaac reached for her hand, cradling it gently in his. Then we need to figure out how to make this work. I do not want to ask you to give up your career. Your work is important and you have fought too hard to establish yourself. But I also cannot abandon my duty to Thomas, not yet. Maybe not for months. What are you suggesting? I do not know, he admitted. I just know that I cannot imagine my future without you in it. They sat in silence for a long moment, hands clasped, the weight of complicated reality pressing down on them. Love was supposed to be simple in stories, but real life rarely cooperated with romance. We will find a way, Olivia said finally, fiercely. If we both want this enough, we will find a way to make it work. Isaac lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. Promise me something. Promise that wherever your work takes you, wherever my pursuit of justice leads me, we will find our way back to each other. I promise, Olivia said. Always. They sealed the promise with their first kiss, tentative and sweet, tasting of hope despite the uncertainty ahead. The fire burned low in the hearth, and outside the winter wind sang its endless song, but inside the parlor warmth and love created a shelter all their own. The next few weeks brought both joy and frustration. Isaac and Olivia were officially courting now, recognized by the town as a couple. But practical problems remained. Isaac received word that Crane's gang had been spotted near Virginia City, 3 days' hard ride to the southwest. His sense of duty warred with his desire to stay near Olivia. She, meanwhile, received instructions from the mining company to prepare for a spring expedition into the Absaroka Range, a month-long survey that would take her far from Bozeman. They argued about it one snowy afternoon in late February, standing in Isaac's room at the boarding house where he lodged. His belongings were spread across the bed, preparations for departure. You are not fully healed, Olivia said, frustration sharpening her voice. Your shoulder will not withstand hard riding and possible gunfights. You could be killed, Isaac. I know the risks, he replied, equally frustrated. But I made a promise to Thomas. His widow deserves justice. His children deserve to know their father's killer was brought to account. And what about us? What about the promises we made to each other? This does not change those promises. I will come back, Olivia, and you will return from your survey. We will have our future, but first I need to close this chapter of my past. She turned away, blinking back tears. He was right. She knew he was right, but fear clawed at her heart. The West was dangerous. Men died in pursuit of justice all the time, leaving behind people who loved them. Isaac came up behind her, resting his hands gently on her shoulders. I am not going to die, he said softly. You saved my life once. That has to count for something. Maybe I am too stubborn to die now. Despite herself, Olivia laughed, a small choked sound. You are certainly stubborn enough. She turned in his arms and they held each other close. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady, covering the town in fresh white. When do you leave? she asked. 3 days. I have hired 2 men to come with me, experienced trackers. We will find Crane's gang, turn them over to the law, and I will be back before spring truly arrives. And I leave in 4 weeks for my survey. Then we have a month, Isaac said. Let us make the most of it. Those weeks became precious, stolen moments of happiness in the face of approaching separation. They attended a dance at the town hall and scandalized the matrons by waltzing 3 times in succession. They took a sleigh ride into the countryside, bundled in furs, racing across the snow while Olivia laughed with pure joy. They sat in church side by side, sharing a hymnal, their voices blending in song, and they talked endlessly about everything. They learned each other's hopes and fears, shared stories from childhood, debated philosophy and politics and the future of the West. Isaac discovered that Olivia had a wicked sense of humor hidden beneath her professional demeanor. Olivia learned that Isaac wrote poetry sometimes, terrible sentimental verses he had never shown anyone. They are awful, he admitted, embarrassed, when she discovered a notebook among his things. They are sweet, she corrected, reading one about the Montana mountains under moonlight. Unpolished, perhaps, but heartfelt. You see beauty in the world, Isaac. That is a gift. The night before Isaac was due to leave, he came to the boarding house with a small package wrapped in brown paper. Mrs. Thompson showed him to the parlor where Olivia waited, then made herself scarce. I wanted to give you something, Isaac said, handing her the package, to keep while I am gone. Olivia unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a compass, brass and well-worn, the kind freighters used to navigate unfamiliar territory. This was my father's, Isaac explained. He carried it west during the gold rush. It has always brought me home safely. I want you to have it during your survey. Isaac, I cannot take this. It is a family heirloom. You are going to be family, he said simply. When I return, when your survey is complete, I am going to ask you to marry me properly. I want you to have this now as a promise that I mean it. Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks. She clutched the compass tightly, feeling the weight of it, the history and love it represented. I will keep it safe, she promised, and I will be waiting when you return. They kissed goodbye that night, a long, desperate embrace that tried to hold back the inevitable parting. When Isaac finally pulled away, his eyes were suspiciously bright. I love you, Olivia Brennan, he said. Remember that, whatever happens. I love you too. Come back to me. Always. He left at dawn the next morning, riding out with his 2 hired men toward Virginia City and Justice. Olivia watched from the boarding house window until they disappeared from sight, then clutched the compass to her chest and allowed herself to cry. The weeks that followed were the longest of her life. She threw herself into preparations for the survey, organizing equipment, studying maps, corresponding with the mining company. But every night she held Isaac's compass and prayed for his safety. No word came from Virginia City, and she did not know if that was good or bad. The West was vast and communication unreliable. He could be fine or dead, and she would not know until someone brought news. Her survey team gathered in late March, 6 men and herself, preparing to head into the Absaroka Range. The morning they were set to depart, a rider came into town at full gallop, shouting news that spread through Bozeman like wildfire. Crane's gang had been captured near Virginia City. 3 men had tracked them through the mountains and cornered them in a box canyon. There had been a gunfight. 2 gang members were dead, the rest in custody awaiting trial. The 3 men responsible were being hailed as heroes. Olivia's heart leaped into her throat. She grabbed the rider's arm as he passed, demanding details. The men who captured them, are they well? Were any killed? One took a bullet in the leg, but he will live. The others are fine. They are bringing the prisoners to Helena for trial, should arrive in about a week. Not dead. Isaac was not dead. Relief flooded through her so intensely she felt dizzy. He had kept his promise. He had survived. But her survey was leaving today, heading into the mountains for a month. She could not wait for him to return. Duty and contract bound her to the mining company. She had obligations, professional commitments she could not simply abandon. Mrs. Thompson found her standing in the street, torn between two impossible choices. "Go on your survey," the widow said gently. "He would want you to. He knows how important your work is. There will be time for reunions when you both return." Olivia knew she was right, but it did not make leaving any easier. She wrote a letter, pouring her heart onto the page, expressing relief at his safety and frustration at the timing that kept them apart. She left it with Mrs. Thompson to give to Isaac when he came back to Bozeman, then shouldered her pack and headed into the mountains with her survey team. The work was absorbing, demanding her full attention. They mapped geological formations, collected samples, documented mineral deposits that could potentially be mined. The Absaroka Range was stunning, all sharp peaks and alpine meadows, with wildlife abundant and weather unpredictable. Olivia lost herself in the familiar rhythms of fieldwork, though Isaac was never far from her thoughts. She carried his compass everywhere, using it to navigate and finding comfort in the physical reminder of his promise. At night, camped under star-filled skies, she would hold it and imagine him holding the same stars from wherever he was. Isaac, meanwhile, had returned to Bozeman 3 days after Olivia departed. His leg wound was minor, barely worth mentioning, and the satisfaction of seeing Crane's gang in custody made up for the discomfort. Thomas's widow had wept with gratitude when he brought her the news. Justice had been served. He had kept his promise to his dead partner. Now he could focus on the future, on Olivia and the life they would build together. But Mrs. Thompson gave him Olivia's letter with an apologetic smile, explaining about the survey. Isaac read it twice, absorbing every word, then folded it carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket near his heart. A month. He could wait a month. He had waited this long already. He used the time productively, making plans for their future. His freight business needed rebuilding after months of neglect. He hired new drivers, repaired wagons, negotiated contracts. But he also looked for property, a house they could make their own. Something with space for Olivia's rock specimens and laboratory equipment, because he knew she would continue her geological work after they married. He found a place on the edge of town, a small house with a barn and several outbuildings, room to expand the freight business while maintaining a home. The owner was relocating to California and willing to sell cheap. Isaac put down earnest money and began making improvements, imagining Olivia's reaction when he showed her. April melted into May, and the Montana landscape transformed. Snow retreated to the highest peaks, revealing green meadows and wildflowers. Rivers ran high with snowmelt, and the air filled with the sounds of returning birds. It was a season of renewal, of things beginning again. Olivia's survey team emerged from the mountains on the 15th of May, sunburned and exhausted but successful. They had mapped extensive mineral deposits and collected enough samples to keep analysts busy for months. The mining company would be pleased. As they rode into Bozeman, Olivia scanned the streets with barely concealed eagerness, searching for one particular face. She did not have to search long. Isaac was waiting outside Mrs. Thompson's boarding house, leaning against the porch railing with studied casualness that fooled no one. When he saw her riding up Main Street, his face split into a grin that made her heart soar. She dismounted before her horse fully stopped, ran to him, and threw herself into his arms. He caught her easily, spinning her around, laughing with pure joy. They kissed right there in the street, scandalizing and delighting the townspeople in equal measure. "You came back," Isaac said unnecessarily, holding her close. "I promised I would, and you kept your promise too. You are alive and well, and justice has been served." "The past is finished," he agreed. "Now we can focus on the future, our future. Come with me, I have something to show you." He helped her onto his horse, mounting behind her, and they rode out to the property he had purchased. Olivia gasped when she saw it. The house freshly painted, flower boxes under the windows, a workshop built beside the barn. "The workshop is for you," Isaac explained, dismounting and helping her down. "For your geological equipment and samples. You will need a proper laboratory if you are going to continue your research. You bought this, for us, for our future, if you will have me." He dropped to one knee right there in the yard, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold ring set with a small diamond. "Olivia Brennan, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you and supporting your work and being grateful that I got shot and you found me in a cave?" Olivia laughed through sudden tears. "That is the strangest proposal I have ever heard. Yes, Isaac Murdock. Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and kissed her thoroughly, sealing the promise they had made to each other that winter night in Bozeman. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he took her hand and led her toward the house. "Let me show you our home," he said. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church, where they had attended services together through the winter. Mrs. Thompson cried happy tears, and half the town turned out to witness the union of the tough freighter and the brilliant geologist, who had found love in the midst of a blizzard. Olivia wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk, and Isaac looked uncomfortable but dignified in his best suit. They spoke their vows clearly, voices steady with conviction, promising to love and honor each other through whatever hardships the frontier might bring. The reception was held at the hotel, with dancing and food and toasts that grew increasingly elaborate as the evening wore on. Jack Carson stood and declared that Isaac was the luckiest man in Montana territory, which earned general agreement and a blush from the bride. Mrs. Thompson gave a teary speech about true love conquering all obstacles. The minister's wife, Mrs. Patterson, praised Olivia's medical skills and predicted great things for the couple. As the party wound down, Isaac and Olivia slipped away to their new home, riding through the spring night beneath a canopy of stars. The house welcomed them, warm and solid, a shelter they would fill with love and laughter and life. Their first year of marriage was an adventure in compromise and collaboration. Olivia continued her geological work, conducting surveys and writing papers that were published in Eastern scientific journals. Her work gained recognition, and the mining company increased her responsibilities. Isaac rebuilt his freight business, hauling ore and supplies throughout Montana territory. He brought Olivia along when he could, and she used the opportunities to study new geological formations. They learned each other's rhythms, how to support individual ambitions while building a shared life. Isaac taught Olivia how to shoot a rifle properly, insisting she needed to defend herself during solo fieldwork. She taught him more about geology until he could identify common rocks and understand basic mining principles. They turned the workshop into a proper laboratory, and Isaac took pride in showing visitors his wife's scientific equipment. The town of Bozeman watched their unconventional marriage with interest. Some disapproved of a wife who worked outside the home, but most came to respect the partnership. When Olivia published a paper identifying valuable copper deposits, bringing mining investment to the region, even her critics had to acknowledge the economic benefit. And Isaac's freight business prospered as the mining industry grew, creating a pleasing symmetry. They faced challenges, of course. A harsh winter in their second year killed several of Isaac's horses and nearly bankrupted the business. Olivia's funding was threatened when a new administrator at the mining company questioned the value of employing a female geologist. But they weathered these storms together, supporting each other through setbacks and celebrating victories. In the spring of their third year together, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. They had talked about children, wanted them eventually, but the reality was daunting. How would she continue her fieldwork? What if something went wrong? Isaac was uncharacteristically nervous, hovering over her constantly until she finally told him to stop treating her like fragile glass. "I hiked through mountains and survived a blizzard," she reminded him. "I can certainly handle pregnancy." But privately, she shared his fears. She was 27 years old, no longer young by frontier standards for a first pregnancy. And she had seen too many women die in childbirth, had attended too many frontier funerals where both mother and child were buried together. Mrs. Thompson and Mrs. Patterson rallied around her, providing advice and reassurance. Dr. Foster, Bozeman's physician, examined her regularly and declared her healthy and strong. As her body changed, swelling with new life, Olivia adjusted her work schedule, focusing on laboratory analysis rather than field work. Isaac hired additional help for the freight business so he could stay closer to home. On a cold December night, 3 years almost to the day after Isaac had been shot and Olivia had saved his life, she went into labor. The process was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Isaac paced outside the bedroom door while Mrs. Thompson and Dr. Foster attended Olivia. He had faced down armed outlaws without flinching, but the sounds of his wife's pain nearly undid him. Just before dawn, a baby's cry pierced the air. Isaac burst through the door to find Olivia exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "We have a son," she said, her voice hoarse from screaming. "A beautiful, healthy son." Isaac approached slowly, almost afraid to believe it. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that squinted against the lamplight. He was perfect. "What should we name him?" Olivia asked. Isaac thought of his father, the man who had given him the compass that led him home. "James," he said. "James Murdock, if that suits you." "James," Olivia repeated, testing the name. The baby stirred at the sound, tiny fists waving. "Yes, James is perfect." Fatherhood transformed Isaac in ways he had not expected. He had always been driven, focused on business and justice and building something meaningful. But holding his son, feeling the tiny weight of that new life, gave him a different perspective. This was what mattered most. This family, this home, this love they had built from nothing. Olivia adjusted to motherhood with characteristic determination. She had help from Mrs. Thompson, who moved into their home for the first months, and she refused to let pregnancy end her career. When James was 6 months old, she returned to fieldwork on a limited basis, bringing the baby along on shorter surveys with a wet nurse in tow. It was unconventional, even scandalous, but it worked for them. Years passed, marked by the rhythms of frontier life. Isaac's freight business grew into one of the largest in Montana territory, employing a dozen drivers and running routes throughout the region. Olivia's geological work contributed to the discovery of several valuable mineral deposits, and she published papers that were read and respected in academic circles. They made improvements to their home, adding rooms and expanding the laboratory workshop. James grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved both his father's horses and his mother's rocks. At age 4, he could identify basic minerals and knew the names of all the horses in the freight stable. Olivia and Isaac watched him with pride, seeing the best of both of them reflected in their son. When James was 5, Olivia became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she delivered a healthy daughter they named Elizabeth, after Isaac's mother. Elizabeth had her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue-gray eyes, and from the start, she displayed a stubborn independence that made both parents laugh. The Murdock family became an institution in Bozeman. Their unconventional arrangement, with Olivia continuing her career and Isaac supporting her ambitions, gradually became accepted as simply the way things were. Young women began seeking Olivia's advice on education and careers. The local newspaper ran a profile calling her a model of modern womanhood. Isaac was known as a fair employer and savvy businessman, but also as a man secure enough to support his wife's independence. They never forgot the cave where it all began. Each winter, on the anniversary of that blizzard, they would tell their children the story of how they met. James and Elizabeth listened with wide eyes as their parents described the storm, the bullet, the desperate surgery by firelight. It became family legend, the foundation myth of their love. "Mama cut a bullet out of Papa," James would ask, as if he could not quite believe it despite hearing the story many times. "With a pocket knife," Olivia confirmed. "It was terrifying but necessary. Sometimes we do hard things because they must be done." "And Papa was very brave," Isaac would add, winking at his son. "I only passed out once." When James was 10 and Elizabeth 7, Isaac took them to the cave. It was summer, the mountains green and welcoming, nothing like the frozen wasteland of that long-ago winter. They hiked up the familiar trail, and Isaac showed them the narrow entrance where he had crawled to shelter. "I thought I was going to die," he said simply, letting his children see the truth in his face. "I was bleeding and freezing, and I had given up hope. Then your mother found me." "Why did you help him, Mama?" Elizabeth asked. "He was a stranger. Weren't you scared?" "Terrified," Olivia admitted. "But I could not let him die when I had the knowledge to save him. Sometimes our skills are given to us so we can help others. And sometimes helping a stranger changes your whole life in the best possible way." They stood together in the cave, a family forged from chance and courage and love. Isaac wrapped his arms around Olivia, and their children pressed close, all of them connected by the invisible threads of shared history. The years continued to pass. Montana Territory became a state in 1889, and Bozeman grew from a frontier town into a proper city. The railroad brought more people and commerce. The wild days of the Old West gradually gave way to a more settled civilization. Isaac and Olivia grew older, their children grew up, and life moved forward with relentless progress. James, at 18, decided to study engineering at the new agricultural college in Bozeman, combining his father's practical skills with his mother's scientific mind. Elizabeth, at 15, announced her intention to become a physician, inspired by her mother's medical work in that frozen cave. Both parents supported these ambitions without reservation, having learned long ago that restricting dreams helped no one. Isaac's hair turned gray at the temples, giving him a distinguished air. Olivia acquired spectacles for close work, laughing at how middle age crept up despite their best efforts. But they were happy, deeply and genuinely happy, with the life they had built together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the town threw them a celebration at the newly built Opera House. It seemed half of Montana turned out to honor the couple who had become local legends. Speeches were made praising Isaac's business acumen and Olivia's contributions to geological science. Their children stood proudly beside them, along with grandchildren now, James having married a schoolteacher and produced two offspring of his own. When it was Isaac's turn to speak, he stood and took Olivia's hand, looking out at the assembled crowd. 25 years ago, he began, I made the worst and best decision of my life. I rode alone into a blizzard chasing justice, got shot for my troubles, and nearly died in a frozen cave. But that terrible decision led me to this woman, the love of my life, who saved me in every way a person can be saved. She dug a bullet out of my shoulder by firelight, nursed me through fever, and then had the poor judgment to fall in love with me. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Olivia squeezed his hand, her eyes shining. We have built a good life, Isaac continued. Raised fine children who are smarter than both of us, created a home filled with love and respect and partnership. But it all started in that cave on the worst night of my life, when an extraordinary woman refused to let a stranger die. Olivia Brennan Murdock, you are my heart, my partner, and my greatest adventure. Thank you for 25 years. I look forward to 25 more. The crowd erupted in applause. Olivia stood and kissed her husband, not caring who watched. They had never been conventional, had never lived by others' expectations. Why start now? The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually, Isaac and Olivia slipped away to walk through the quiet streets of Bozeman. The town was so different from when they had first arrived, grown and civilized, but some things remained the same. The Bridger Mountains still loomed to the north, eternal and unchanging. The stars still blazed overhead with crystalline clarity, and they still walked hand in hand, as comfortable with silence as with conversation after so many years together. You ever regret it? Isaac asked as they approached their home, the house they had made together. Marrying me instead of focusing solely on your career. You could have accomplished so much more without the obligations of family. Olivia stopped walking and turned to face him, framing his face with her hands. I accomplished exactly what I wanted, she said firmly. Important work that contributed to scientific knowledge, yes, but also a partnership with someone who respects and supports me. Children who will carry our values forward, a love that has sustained me through every challenge. I have no regrets, Isaac Murdock, not a single one. He kissed her forehead gently. Neither do I. Getting shot was the best thing that ever happened to me. They laughed together at the absurdity of it, then walked the final distance home. The house welcomed them, warm and familiar, filled with the accumulated treasures of a life well lived. Olivia's geological specimens lined shelves in the laboratory. Isaac's freight business records occupied a desk in the study. Family photographs covered the walls, documenting decades of birthdays and holidays and ordinary moments made precious by love. They sat together on the porch swing as they had done countless times before, watching the stars wheel overhead. Age had slowed them down, added aches and pains, but it had also given them perspective. They knew how rare and precious their love was, how easily things could have gone differently. One slight change in timing, one different decision, and they never would have met. Isaac would have died in that cave, or survived but never encountered the woman who would become his wife. Olivia would have continued her career alone, brilliant and accomplished, but missing this other dimension of life. Instead, they had found each other at exactly the right moment, when both needed saving in different ways. The bullet and the blizzard and the frozen cave had been the crucible that forged their bond, testing and proving them before they even knew what they meant to each other. Tell me something, Olivia said, resting her head on Isaac's shoulder. If you could go back to that day, knowing everything that would happen, would you still ride alone into that blizzard? Isaac considered the question seriously. Yes, he said finally, because it led me here to you, to this life. I would endure it all again, every moment of pain and fear, to end up sitting on this porch with you beside me. Even the part where I cut into your shoulder with a pocket knife. Especially that part. It makes for a wonderful story. Olivia laughed, the sound carrying across their property and into the Montana night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered, its howl both lonesome and free. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and approaching summer. Life continued its endless cycle, seasons turning, years passing, but some things remained constant. Love, Olivia thought. Partnership. The decision to face life's challenges together rather than alone. These were the things that mattered, the legacy they would leave behind. They sat on the porch until the sky began to lighten in the east, heralding dawn. Then they rose together, joints creaking but spirits undimmed, and went inside to begin another day. There was work to be done, always work, but it was good work, meaningful work. And they would do it together, as they had done everything for 25 years. The story that had begun in a frozen cave with blood and fear and desperate hope had transformed into something beautiful. A marriage, a family, a partnership that defied conventions and proved that love could flourish even in the harsh environment of the frontier. They had saved each other, not just that night in the cave, but every day since, choosing each other again and again through all the challenges life threw their way. And they would continue choosing each other, Olivia knew, until their last breaths. That was what love meant. Not the dramatic gestures and heightened emotions of that first desperate winter, though those had their place, but the daily choice to support and cherish and remain, building a life one ordinary day at a time until suddenly you looked back and realized you had created something extraordinary. The sun rose over the Bridger Mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. A new day in Montana, in Bozeman, in the life of Isaac and Olivia Murdock. They stood at the kitchen window, watching the light spread across their property, and shared a smile that needed no words. This, Olivia thought, this was everything. And it had all started because a bullet had torn through a cowboy's shoulder during a winter storm, and a geologist had refused to let a stranger die in a frozen cave. Sometimes the worst moments of your life led to the best things. Sometimes pain and fear transformed into joy and love. Sometimes saving someone else saved you in return. The years ahead would bring their own challenges. Isaac and Olivia both knew this. Age would eventually catch up with them, as it caught everyone. There would be losses and disappointments, as there always were. But they would face it together, as they had faced everything since that night in the cave. Together, they were stronger than any obstacle. Together, they could weather any storm. And someday, when they were both very old and ready to rest, they would leave behind children and grandchildren who carried their story forward. James and Elizabeth would tell their own children about the cowboy and the geologist, the bullet and the cave, the love that began in the most unlikely circumstances. The story would become family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that courage and compassion could change everything. But that was far in the future. Today, this moment, Isaac and Olivia had each other. They had their home, their work, their family. They had the promise of another day together and another after that, and as many more as God and fortune allowed. They had survived the blizzard, both literal and metaphorical, and emerged stronger on the other side. Isaac pulled Olivia close, kissing the top of her head. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the steady beat of his heart under her cheek. The same heart that had kept beating through blood loss and fever. The same heart that had chosen to love her completely and without reservation. She pressed her ear against his chest, listening to that precious rhythm, and sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for frozen caves and desperate decisions, and bullets that missed major arteries by inches. Their love story was not typical, but then again, nothing about their lives had ever been typical. They had forged their own path, created their own definition of partnership and success. And they had done it together, the cowboy and the geologist, bound together by fate and choice and the unbreakable promise made during a Montana blizzard 25 years ago. The morning stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and ordinary tasks. There were horses to feed and papers to write, business to conduct and grandchildren to visit. The rhythm of their days was comfortable now, worn smooth by decades of repetition. But underneath, the routine lay the bedrock of their love, solid and enduring as the mountains that surrounded their home. They would continue like this for many more years, God willing. Growing old together, supporting each other's dreams, being present for life's joys and sorrows. And when the end finally came, as it came for everyone, they would face it as they had faced everything else. Together, hands clasped, grateful for every moment they had been given. But that was far away yet. Today was for living, for loving, for being grateful that a bullet had brought them together in a frozen cave one desperate winter night. Today was for remembering that sometimes the worst things lead to the best things, and sometimes saving a stranger's life saves your own in the process. Isaac and Olivia Murdock stood together in their kitchen as the sun rose higher, illuminating their home with golden light. They had built something lasting, something true, something worth the pain it had cost to create, and they would cherish it for all their remaining days, the unlikely love story that began with blood and ice and ended with happiness beyond measure. This was their happily ever after, earned through courage and choice and unwavering commitment. Not perfect because life was never perfect, but real and deep and utterly theirs. The cowboy and the geologist, the bullet and the cave, the love that conquered winter and lasted forever. And every year when the first snow fell, coating Montana in white, they would remember that night and thank God for blizzards and desperate chances, and the woman brave enough to cut a bullet from a stranger's shoulder by firelight while the world froze around them. That was where it all began. That was where their forever started.